I would like to introduce Professor Sergei Gleyzer. He is a professor at, is currently a professor at Alabama University, right? I said right, Alabama University. His field of expertise is particle fields, particle physics, experimental particle physics, machine learning. He's expert on it, of course. And Professor Sergei is a collaborator of us, has come to Brazil, I think a couple of times, maybe more, has participated in the international school, the Lichep International School, has visited us at UERJ. So it's a friend of us. And then I will pass the word for him to present make a presentation for us in this national meeting. Thank you, Professor Sergei.
Well, thank you very much, Wagner. It's always a pleasure to see lots of familiar faces and names, and I certainly wish that, hopefully, in other circumstances will be another occasion for us to get together. We have to be patient, certainly. But in any case, I'm very happy to be here today. Let me just start to share my my slides here, and can you confirm that they're visible?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so thank you so much for this very nice introduction. Again, my name is Sergei Gleyzer. I'm a faculty at the University of Alabama, and I will talk to you today about an exciting area in high energy physics that has to do with machine learning and its applications to various areas. And I'll go maybe even a little bit broader than experimental particle physics, if time allows me. Okay, so what am I going to talk about today? We'll introduce, first of all, what exactly is machine learning and how does it connect to particle physics. I'll focus a bit more on applications to reconstruction and analysis. And just to give you an idea, this is a very happening field, and there's lots of application across all the different so-called frontiers. The energy frontier, with all the collider experiments. And then, of course, there's also the intensity frontier, neutrino experiments, and dark matter detection experiments that are going on. And they all have various machine learning developments happening here. So I will not focus on all of it. I'll just give you some representative examples in some cases that I'm, participating in. So you'll get maybe not the most broad view, but hopefully significantly broad. And in some cases, I will jump into specific details and show you some concrete examples. That's the choice I want to make today. And if there is some time, I want to talk about also the other way. The first part of the talk is going to focus more on how machine learning is transforming the field of physics, and in particular high energy physics. But I'll also talk about how it's kind of a both-way street, and how some ideas from physics actually help us again to improve some of the machine learning that then we can again go and apply to physics. So that's the plan for the talk. Now, let me start very basic. What is machine learning? I like this particular definition. Machine learning, you can think of it as a study of algorithms, and they're not just any kind of algorithms, but there's types of algorithms that can get better at a particular tasks that you can define, and you can kind of track their performance. And the goal is that you train these algorithms, so meaning they're exposed to data, they're learning, they obtain experience, and as they get more experience, they get better at those tasks. So the tasks could be identifying cats or faces, if you're Facebook, for example, or particles, or entire particle-related events, if you're a particle physicist. So that's just a kind of a key operating definition that we're going to work on. You can think of these even, you think about, human learning as well, especially, as you go from little babies growing up to toddlers, and so you're exposed to more data about the world, and then you kind of learn your way through. Sometimes it's supervised, sometimes it's unsupervised. There's some analogy also to how these algorithms are learning, in some sense, to how humans learn too. Okay, so when is machine learning useful? When it's typically useful whenever we humans cannot really articulate our experience or why something is working, right? It's also often useful if there's no good alternative solution, or no solution at all. And I'll give you some examples of this for problems that are just really hard. Now, other situations involve when you require a lot of fine tuning, you have to go back and make a lot of changes and then update things and keep them kind of running. So that's also a good situation, of course, kind of for an automated approach. Another is, of course, when the environment itself is fluctuating and undergoing some changes. And ultimately, in the end, it's also a practical thing where, maybe your software or the thing that you want to do is maybe too complex to just write down by hand or through some, simple heuristic. So in that sense, machine learning is a particularly useful tool. So in computer science, it's already used de facto for a ton of things, from speech recognition to NLP to computer vision, natural language processing, computer vision, robots, self-driving cars, medicine. The vaccine. The examples are really broad and they're growing. There's a lot more of them coming out, and part of it is because the algorithms have gotten better over time, significantly better, especially over the past decade with the rise of deep learning, so-called deep learning revolution. And a lot of it also has to do that we're collecting a lot more data about the environment around us and about the traces about our interactions with that environment that we can learn some useful things from. Now, some examples are, for example, when you deal with pixelated images, how do you analyze them to identify objects? Right, and we'll talk about a connection here between something we want to do and also in particle physics. So here you can see in the top left, right, you have an algorithm that takes in individual pixels from these images, and then it tries to put a bounding box of segmentation and identify a particular object in that box. Is this a person? Is this a dog? Is this a chair? And so on. This can get more complicated the more objects are present. And on the bottom picture, you can see what, maybe like a self-driving car would see, right? You can use different types of location, and cameras and LiDARs and so on, just to kind of bounce things off of the environment and track what's going on so that you can figure out whether, any of that poses any danger or risk to you as you're driving along, assessing the situation, figuring out what the car or the agent should do next. On the bottom left-hand side is a kind of a canonical example of handwritten digits recognition. This is a famous data set that everybody kind of starts with. And it's interesting enough that there are enough handwriting types in the world, right, that it's possible to confuse one person's 7 with another person's 1. So it's not necessarily a trivial problem. And humans do make mistakes when analyzing the data, and it turns out that these machine learning algorithms can do a pretty good job here as well. Okay, so continuing on, I want to talk about machine learning now more, rather than broadly, more specifically as they apply to particle physics. Now, this is not so much a new thing, and if you think it's a new thing, you're wrong. So the parallel I'd like to say is that the World Wide Web itself, which started at CERN, as you may know. By the way, today happens to be CERN's birthday, 67 years old. Well, the World Wide Web is not that old. It's only about 32 now. Now, it turns out that the earliest digital paper that I could find, or any artifact that I could find, also goes back to about the same time. Okay, and that it's taught, this particular note from the Gleyzer experiment talks about applications of neural networks in high energy physics. In fact, one of our current collaborators from CMS, one of the co-authors, Dave Cutts. But I believe that this paper refers to earlier works that I couldn't locate, but that means that they existed even before that. So you can tell this is not necessarily new, and it has evolved in a way to kind of also similarly in a way that the whole field of machine learning has evolved over this time. And I'll give you a little bit of a time capsule. We're going to do a little bit of a time travel, and we're going to start here, but we're going to go into more recent future. But first, I want to talk about, of course, the Large Hadron Collider, and I'm very close to this particular experiment. This is where I started as a PhD student. I continue now as faculty. This is a huge endeavor. Of course, it's a scientific wonder, both of science and engineering. It took quite a long time to design, construct, and now it's been operating for quite some time. Now we're planning to actually continue, running this experiment and also upgrade it, in the near future to run maybe for another at least 15 years and collect a lot of data that can be analyzed for hints of new physics. You know, it could be dark matter or an extra dimension, something else, something we haven't seen, something hopefully even maybe unexpected as well. Now, it's been a very wonderful collaboration of thousands of scientists across the world, including those also from Brazil. And one thing, of course, as you may of course all know, is that one of the early discoveries made by the Large Hadron Collider, and this was around July 4th, 2012, that was presented by both ATLAS and CMS collaborations, was the discovery of the Higgs boson. And this was a very fundamental achievement because this particle was sought after for quite some time, and it was wonderful to finally find it. But since then, of course, we've been also trying to understand this particle and see whether it behaves as it should, and maybe there are any connections to some new physics based on that. So this was a great day for all of us, of course, in the community. And another reason I'm showing you this, I want to actually show you the two famous, of course, discovery plots, both from ATLAS and CMS. You can see here, a falling spectrum, in the invariant mass of the diphoton system, and then you notice a little bump, which, over time has only, gotten more significant. But even at the time, it was pretty evident that there was a new particle there around 125, 126 gigaelectron volts. And what's interesting is that it was seen not only in this channel, but another channel. So the reason I want to point this out is that, I'll come back to this in a second, but machine learning, in many ways, you can actually look at this particular discovery analysis and appreciate what it does and how it has evolved since about that time. So we're right at a time around 2012 right now. And at the time, machine learning really, the focus was on four things, right? One was, how do you identify different objects? How do we use machine learning to identify, jets, photons, electrons, et cetera? Is there any advantage to that? This is basically classification. Another example of a classification, which is a standard sort of machine learning task, is also to classify different types of events. So could you maximally separate something you're looking for, a sought after signal like the Higgs boson or dark matter, for example, from its corresponding backgrounds? So other known standard model processes that mimic that particular topology that you're looking for in this new model. Now, those are very kind of canonical examples. There are other examples that don't have to do with classification. For example, regression. So when you try to estimate the properties of an object, based on the inputs. So here you're trying to estimate some kind of a continuous, some number rather than try to predict a class or a category as you would in a classification. Of course, there is a huge challenge. We have a huge challenge. To understand the data, we also need to understand all the backgrounds. We do a lot of studies. We have a very good first principles model, so we do a lot of studies also with Monte Carlo simulations, and they take quite a long time to simulate, since you have a forward model and you also have to simulate all the interactions with the detectors and so on. It's very complicated and cumbersome. And so using machine learning techniques to learn the representations of these events and potentially run inference and generate new ones, kind of like as if you would generate other things with these so-called generative models, is another area. And this really started to blow up around this time. Now, concretely, in one of the analyses related to the Higgs discovery, you could see already that machine learning at the time that was available at the time was used to identify the particles, identify the interactions, the primary vertices, to do energy regression, to do photon energy regression in particular, to improve the resolution of the measurement and the search, and ultimately also to do event selection. So if you see on the bottom right here, a plot, at the time people were using boosted decision trees. This was pre-deep learning, right? So this was at the time where boosted decision trees were predominantly used in particle physics over neural networks. And you can see that there was a classifier. So what that means is that this is a prediction where a given event would get a score between 0 and 1. And if you are a Higgs-like event, you would be sitting on the right. If you're a background-like event, you would end up maybe somewhere on the left. And so what that particular time, what that analysis did, was to throw away everything in gray so to the left, essentially reducing the background significantly so that you could indeed actually see this Higgs bump, which would be much more difficult if you did not remove all the background and done all this other important steps. So this led to improvements in analysis. So that's what was the situation about, I would say, roughly about 10 years ago. And I'll give you a feeling for how things have evolved since then. Since then, there have been really an explosion of applications, but also the algorithms have improved themselves. But also there's been explosion in applications to various areas, from tracking. How do you track the different particles based on the different deposits that are left in the detectors? How do you combine the information from different, from the whole detector, right? We have multiple detectors that are supposed to measure different types of things about different types of particles, right? So we have, some of them are targeting specific kind of particles, others complement each other. And so how do you best put all that information together, present this to, possibly, a machine learning algorithm to either make sense of it or try to do something like particle or event level identification. There's also applications to simulation. I mentioned fast simulation. These more recent techniques that have come about, such as imaging, techniques from computer vision, from geometric deep learning, like graph neural networks, have been also very well applied to colorimetry and jet tagging and many other useful applications. And ultimately, our goal is also to put all those nice algorithms and all those nice advances onto our hardware, onto our trigger system, just after some compression and making sure that it fits under the latency requirements of the system, so that we can actually utilize the power of machine learning at the very first step, rather than in the very end, how it kind of mostly has been. So these are some of the areas I'll talk about in a little bit. Now, as we're moving in time, so now we're about 2014, 2015, the deep learning neural networks started to appear, and their advantage has started to become evident. This is one of the first, is actually the first deep neural network paper in high energy physics, was based on simulated data from Monte Carlo simulation, and it actually showed a concrete improvement from applying a deep version of a neural network compared to a deep classifier compared to a shallow classifier. And this particular paper made a distinction, or this particular data set made a distinction between two types of variables or features. Machine learning speak. So they had so-called low-level features, which would be something that, something akin to kinematical variables in your event, something like the 4-vector type information, angles, momenta, etc., of different particles that are observed. And then there was also some what are called high-level features, and the high-level features in this particular case refer to maybe more theory or phenomenologist inspired, theory-inspired kind of more complex variables. Maybe it's some boost to some kind of rest frame, ecoplanarity, all kind of things like this. That theorists have taken some time to think about, to find a binary, a variable where your signal, let's say some kind of Higgs topology in this case, would look different from the background. So it requires some expert input. And what was interesting is that you found that these, and I'll highlight that maybe in an example here, is that the worst you can do is apply a shallow classifier to just the low-level features. That's the worst you could do. So applying something like a shallow neural network or a boosted decision tree, for example, to the low-level features. That's in green. So this is an ROC curve. So you want to be close to the top. The area under this curve should be close to 1. So you want to be somewhere on the top right corner, right? You want to be closer to one axis. Now, the worst performing one was shallow and low level variables. Now, what's interesting is that once you've introduced high level variables, this sort of expert information, and that can be shown, of course, in the blue curve, to the shallow algorithm, like a boosted decision tree, for example, you notice some improvements. So you can conclude that, oh, this expert information is actually relevant for this problem. And therefore, these algorithms picked up on that and attained a better performance. What is quite interesting, of course, is what happens when you apply a deep neural network, in this case, just a fully connected neural network, just more layers and so forth, more parameters. And what's interesting is that this red and black curve are sitting on top of each other. Now, the red curve is the deep neural network applied to the combination of low-level and high-level features, as defined here. While the black one is the deep neural network applied just to the low-level features. Now, this is interesting because both of them are better than the blue curve. So that tells you that, first of all, going deep is useful and is worthwhile. The second thing that this showed is that, it's not necessary, potentially, to handcraft or identify some of these, sort of expert level features and present them to the network. That the deep neural networks were capable of extracting information directly from constructing them out of the low level features, which is a very interesting kind of philosophical idea that maybe they're not exactly creating the same features as the expert features, but they're able to construct equivalent or features that contain equivalent information that they can exploit. So that was something interesting. It's a bit of a difference, a paradigm shift, of course, from having to come up with all the expert information and present it to the machine learning algorithm. This potentially, kind of hinted at the fact that one could apply these sufficiently powerful algorithms even to low-level data. Well, maybe low level is a definition that varies depending who you ask. But the point is that these algorithms are powerful enough to extract and create their own, their own representations that are useful. So that was quite interesting. And another kind of interesting example, there was a companion data set with this. There was one on the Higgs, one on the supersymmetry, and I'm showing here just a study was done as a project in the machine learning class that I was teaching last semester, and this here it actually shows something similar. This here it talks about dimensionality reduction. So what this shows is that in this particular case there were lots of features, right, lots of variables, including some really high level features like Gleyzer quantities and other these things that took people a while to get to and construct. But what this shows is that you're able to get most of the performance without them, actually using reduced feature representation. So which tells you that the information itself is contained in the low level features, right? And then if you have a useful way of extracting it, you don't actually need some of these high level features that have been presented. So those are very interesting things that became clear around 2015 or so and later, and they've impacted subsequent studies. So one other really important development that happened around 2016 was also the applications of some of these computer vision algorithms like convolutional neural networks to jet images. So images of jets, different types of jets even. And this is an idea of using, and this is similarly explored also exploited also by neutrino experiments, whereby you can actually present your data, in sort of, kind of like this, like a scene, where you try to you try to apply some of these computer vision techniques to problems that are basically expressed as images. And 2D grids, for example, or 3D grids, and that worked. And although I should point out that this is maybe an early version, there's always such a thing. Where first you come up with the idea, and then for subsequent work tends to adapt and change and sometimes go away from the original idea. So not everything in this picture remained the same over time. So here there was a lot of transformations done. There is a lot of coarseness. It was a nice result, but things have changed. Now let me show you how they have changed over time. But before that, I want to talk about a key question, a really key question that I really want to highlight that is broadly applicable. And the question is, and this is something I started talking about just a couple of slides ago, talking about low-level data. Now, we have a very good first principles model, right? The standard model, its interactions. We understand the interactions also with the detectors and the materials and so on. But we're lucky. In our case, we have a good first principles model. So the way a typical analysis in high-energy physics the way it looked like in the past, even using machine learning, it looked like this. You start with some raw information, Obviously, it's sparse. Not all the channels light up any given event. So in the end, what a reconstruction algorithm, first of all, you would sparsify the data, and then you would potentially apply some kind of a reconstruction algorithm, some sort of a heuristic algorithm that looks at all the different hits left in all different detectors, combines the information somehow, and builds, jets and missing energy and everything else that you can figure out about the event, and then everything would use that as an input. So an analysis would say, for example, a Higgs search for photon decays would say, please give me all the 2 photon events, and then I'm going to start analyzing that. And so at that point, when you build an analysis, you basically select some kind of 50 basic or maybe you would call them high-level features. And then at that point, this is kind of 2012-ish, I would say, Higgs discovery timeline roughly. You would train machine learning algorithms with that information, essentially high-level information. And in the end, you would combine all that in a classifier, or potentially use some sort of a variable like the mass of the diphoton or dijet system to do hypothesis testing, and everything else, and then either present a discovery or set some limits. So that's what a classical analysis would do. And machine learning, for the most part, was applied to the last stage only. Now, one of the paradigm shifts over the last years, I would say, was actually to start applying successfully applying these machine learning algorithms that were capable of working with raw data, not raw data, but let's say low-level data, like reconstructed hits, like individual hits in the detector, kind of like individual pixels in an image. It's the idea of, instead of first finding, the brows and the noses in an image of a person, to actually give it all the pixels and figure out what's going on already from pixel level information. So that pushes this application of machine learning to an earlier stage. Okay. Now I'm not talking about triggering or anything else here, but we're talking like post triggering. And this was a fundamental thing, a fundamentally different idea, and potentially it saves some of the information lost by some of the more classical reconstruction approaches, which invariably have some information loss. Now, here's an example. Obviously, in the case of the CMS detector, I'm part of the CMS collaboration, as many of our other collaborators that are present here, that we have different complementary information from different detectors. So we have a very nice tracker system. There is very precise information about position from the earlier part of the tracker system, so the pixel layers, the silicon tracker. We have an electromagnetic colorimeter, right, for electromagnetic particles, electrons, photons. Of course, all that is complemented also by the hadronic colorimeter right behind it for all the hadrons, and also to identify jets that leave information in all these detectors I mentioned. And of course, we have a magnet, right? So we can see, we can estimate the momentum of different particles based on the bend, if they're charged, and so forth. And then, of course, there's a muon system out there. So we have all these different disparate systems whose information we can combine together to do some useful physics. Now, an example of this end-to-end deep learning kind of started, at least in the CMS experiment, with this very, very basic task of looking at 2 types of electromagnetic showers, so electrons and photons. And you can see it on the left and the right, a simulated image of 10,000 electrons and photons. And if you look at them, they look very similar by eye. If you really stare really carefully, you'll notice that one of them, the electron one, is slightly asymmetric to the right. Now, I should mention that these are not electrons, these are actually positrons, so they're all the same charge, and they all slightly asymmetric in one direction, well, precisely for that reason, because we have a magnetic field, so positrons will have an asymmetry, right, bend in a certain way. Now, you wouldn't notice that necessarily very immediately if you stared at this, but you can train, again, a computer vision algorithm like a convolutional neural network to distinguish these two very, very well. You can do even better if you have 2 photons versus 2 electrons, something you can see in the top plot. On the bottom is kind of like an image. You can think of it as an image for quarks and gluons, which is another challenge we have, is to separate quark and gluon jets. So here you're showing, there's an image here in the electromagnetic colorimeter, also an image of the tracks projected to the surface of electromagnetic colorimeters. You can see, if you haven't actually visualized what quark jets or gluon jets looks like, well, here is your opportunity. Now, what is really exciting about this is that in this particular case, every
Sergei, sorry to interrupt you. I don't know if it's only for me, but your slide is still the slide of CMS. Okay, no, I'm seeing now. It's probably my connection. Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no problem. So hopefully it's working. Please let me know in case it gets stuck or something.
Okay,
I'll restart it. But anyway, I guess I just wanted to point out that in this case, again, just to kind of recap, every cell of our detector, right, corresponds to, you can think of it, in the image sense, it's a pixel, right, an individual pixel or an input that's supplied to a different type of machine learning model. In this case, it was a convolutional neural network. Now, here are some more examples, and this was an interesting example. This shows the evolution of the jet image from 2016, let's say, up to 2020. You can see in 2016 is the jet image we talked about, way over here, this type of jet image. Now you'll notice that it's very coarse, right? Because it actually uses input the individual particles, right? Particle constituents. On the other hand, the end-to-end image that I just described before, that consists of 3 different layers, in this case, information from the tracker, tracks extrapolated to the colorimeter, the ecal and the hcal, ecal blue, hcal obviously bigger cells in gray. You can see how much more information, how much richer this image is, and this is this of course tells you that there is this information going into the neural network that then it can can use to, in this particular case, classify quarks and gluons. In fact, this approach that I talked about, it really reached the top of this particular problem at the time, compared even some other advanced machine learning algorithms. And you can see that it significantly outperforms what I would call traditional jet images from about 2016. So not all images are created equal, as I should say. So the more information you can produce, and the more information you can expose, useful information that to your neural network and to learn from, seems to be, of course, quite a reasonable thing. Now, here's an even more recent example that goes to even more input data. So this is, for example, top identification. So identifying boosted tops. This, by the way, uses open data from the CMS experiments. Anybody can look at that. And here you're looking at tops. So tops. So jet, in this case, top originated jets. And what you find is that here it's a very busy looking image, but it combines information again from HCal, hadronic colorimeter, electromagnetic colorimeter, ECal in blue, the tracks, but also notice there are 3 pixel layers as well. Now this becomes relevant in this particular case because you also need the information about the primary vertex, so which you can either give chew it out and present to the network, or you can actually give it the raw hits. And you can see that the best performance is obtained when you actually add all the information together, and it becomes a very competitive algorithm. So I'll leave some references here. So if you're interested, you can take a look more about this. Now, let me go on to another topic. Something that we talked about is that this requires quite a lot of information. So obviously modern deep learning, modern neural networks do require a lot of data to train and sometimes a function of data. Now, I want to give a word of caution for everybody who's listening that, it's not just about, just throwing all the data you can in the kitchen sink at the algorithm. You also have to be careful that these algorithms, right, if they're not constrained or if you're not paying attention, they can learn to do something that you don't want it to do, or do something that you consider to be illegal or cheating in some way. So I'll give you an example. So here's a problem where you need to distinguish cats from dogs. Well, one thing, and what's interesting is that this algorithm, when presented with data in this format, will learn how to cheat. Why? Well, it will notice that the dogs mostly appear outside on a grassy green background, while the cats are mostly indoors with non-green. So what that can lead to is behavior like this, right? So an algorithm will ignore the cat and the dog in the picture and actually will just focus on the grass to get the answer. You don't want that, right? But, well, you never told the algorithm that this was somehow wrong or you shouldn't do that. And so you have to pay attention and look under the hood and really see what is happening. And more importantly, understand where your algorithm could be biased in some way. And there's ways to test it, there's ways to control it, and there's ways to fix it. But it's important to know this problem exists. And as an example of that, I'll refer to our, a couple of years ago, an observation of our Higgs decays to bottom quarks. And here, there's ways that you can remove this bias. If you notice on the left plot, this is a different topology. This is Higgs to gamma again. But the idea is the same. If you train an algorithm and you didn't really pay attention to this, you could, of course, you could start to key in on things like the invariant mass of the diphoton system, right? Because the Higgs has a certain fixed mass while the background isn't. So what you can end up with is a classifier or a model that sculpts you, some mass out of the pure background distribution. So you don't want something like that. So you need to remove this bias, which is one option, or you can also build a bias tolerant model, which is there's some examples how to do this. You can actually introduce a penalty for learning the mass basically during your training. This is something you can do. So as an example, this idea was applied to the Higgs to also the Higgs to bottom quarks analysis, and you can see that exactly the example of this on the left. If you didn't pay attention, you could end up with a classifier that actually sculpts your background, right, which is in red. You don't want something like that. You don't want a picture like the left picture. On the other hand, the so-called massless GNN was basically a mass invariant neural network was built. And you can see that it doesn't actually affect the background in any way, and it does correctly also on the signal. And if you apply this sort of algorithm to this particular analysis, which also used for one of the examples of regression I mentioned earlier, you can actually see the Higgs picking out if you look at the mass of the dijet system, which if you didn't do this carefully, might have been tainted or biased, right? So in this case, since it was unbiased, you could actually look at an invariant mass distribution. Okay, so let me continue and talk a little bit about our upcoming challenges. Of course, one of the big upcoming challenges is going to be the data deluge, which is coming our way from Large Hadron Collider, the High Luminosity Large Hadron Collider. And obviously, our resources aren't expected to go up as fast as the volume of the data. And another huge thing is that now that we found the Higgs boson, we're obviously also looking for other things. And it's possible that we don't know what that is. So you have to build analyses that aren't just direct searches for some specific topology. You also have to build robust analyses that can capture some topologies that you didn't even think about, right? And how do you do that? How do you stay flexible yet efficient and optimized? And how do you capture everything there is there to capture? And so that is an upcoming challenge, and the machine learning is also promises to play a big role in all of this. So one challenge that we know exists is already there, right? And that's the pileup collision. So with the high luminosity LHC, the price of having more data is going to be having a lot more of these additional so-called pileup collisions. These are the protons traveling in a bunch that create additional tracks, additional noise, basically, right? That is going to basically break a lot of our algorithms, right? We can't scale with this sort of explosion in the pileup and everything that has to be processed. So we have to be smart about how we analyze these events. First of all, we have to suppress the pileup. Second of all, we have to process. There's a significant computational challenge, and machine learning is likely to play some role in helping us progress here. And I'm going to give you a few examples of what I think are sort of important here. And one, of course, has to do with generative model. And this is the idea of generative adversarial networks, where you have two competing agents, and one is trying to create a very, very good fake and the other tries to figure out whether that's fake or not. And as you train them together, you have this combined, there's two losses that you can combine and look at. And what happens is that you actually get, in the end, you get a very good faker who gets really good at faking things. And then you get a really good discriminator who kind of figures out whether something's fake. So you have two experts now. Well, it turns out that the generator, the faker, the images, the fake people or fake event, even collision events that you make are going to be useful for us, given that it's actually a pretty good representation of the real thing. And these days, these generative models have gotten to the level that they can be useful like that. So here's an example. There's an early example of this.
If you have 5 more minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll go quickly and wrap up.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
yeah. So basically, these examples of these ideas of GANs applied to colorimetry, and of course, I show another example how you can use physics here. And I want to touch about this new idea also using some more sophisticated types of neural networks called graph neural networks applied to particle physics. And I just going to show one example, and that is using these for learning the representation of events. So this particular example uses graph neural network and a so-called variational autoencoder to get graph variational autoencoder to accurately learn the representation of the event. So on the top is the real thing, and then on the bottom is the simulated one. You see, it's very, very similar in every ways you look at it for these particular top events I showed earlier. Now, you can also, one idea I want to bring up real quick is the idea of anomaly detection, and then also casting, not just looking for problems in the detector, but also using this to, I'm going to skip this real quick, but also using this to search for new physics. So you can think of new physics as an anomaly, right? Where the standard model is your sort of known model where events that are different would show up as an anomaly. And so ultimately you also want to put all that in real time in our trigger. Currently our trigger, has machine learning algorithms running on it in CMS. In this case, uses boosted decision trees, but also newer algorithms like neural networks, convolutional neurals, graph neurals have been studied in that context, also in the context of autoencoders. And there is some nice work going on also by the HLS for ML group in trying to put all those things in real time. So I think that's important. I want to leave you with some key ideas for the future and where work needs to happen, of course. One is a need to combine spatial and temporal data. We've kind of ignored some of the temporal data until now, but now it's become more and more important to our field. How do you best learn to represent the data, right? Is it with graphs? Is it with images? What's the best fit with the models that exist? Causal modeling, inference, and compositionality are also other important ideas. And of course, unsupervised learning and physics. And I'm just going to leave you with some open questions. Of course, uncertainty is a big one, even though there's good ideas on how to do it, but still not fully fleshed out. What's the first principle models? How do you interpret these models? What are you learning? What are these features mean? And, I wanted to show you also a quick example of the same thing that I just talked about applied also to gravitational lensing and cosmology. So you can take the same algorithms, apply them to completely different area of particle physics and particle cosmology, and it works. And you can actually use it to identify not just particles in large hadron collider collisions, but you can also use it to identify different types of dark matter substructure models and things like that. So these techniques are versatile, and you can apply them everywhere. So here's an example also of an unsupervised approach. So model-independent anomaly detector that can actually identify these different types of dark matter substructures in these images. So I'm going to stop here. I'm going to skip. I'll leave these slides for you if you're interested. I also wanted to make sure I stress this idea that you can also use relativity and quantum field theory and group theory to improve the deep learning models themselves. Ideas of covariant networks. It's going to be, of course, important for particle physics. And I'll just leave you with this nice example of applying them also to these images. And this solves the problem that, there is a symmetry in the data. And, instead of rotating your data every single different way to present your cat from every side, you can actually build that into the model. And I think that's the future, combining, understanding symmetries, combining physics with machine learning to do something useful. So I won't talk about quantum machine learning, but you need to be aware this also is happening in high energy physics. So I'll just put that slide. And if you want to know more, we had a very nice session on AI for physics, experiment and theory. And here's a link to that. And you can see a lot more from all these very very good speakers here. There is a community white paper in machine learning that has still valid. It's kind of our plan for the decade. And finally, the last thing is hackathons have become really a great way of getting people involved. We have a machine learning hackathon happening right now in CMS. We're organizing, there was a last year, Machine Learning for Science hackathon, where you'll find all these great problems. So if you're a young person who wants to get involved, or if you're a faculty or would like to participate, if you like to share with your students, we're going to organize one in November. If you're interested in getting some of your students involved in machine learning, please reach out. I'll leave my email here, and you can certainly get on the list for that. So thank you so much for your time. I'll stop here, answer any questions, and tell you that we're working really hard to utilize machine learning to really extract all the knowledge that we can from the data. And hopefully this advanced deep learning and machine learning tools is going to help us solve some of these challenges that we have coming up for us in the future. Thank you so much for your time and attention.
Okay, Sergei, thank you very much for this very interesting talk, as always. And well, so I apologize because I didn't announce before that you should have 5 minutes for questions. Okay, so I'm sorry about that. But okay, so we have about 5 minutes for questions. I see here there's some hand raised. Okay, Mateus, please. Sorry, I have to. I think you can. Yes, I think you have the open mic. Okay, go ahead.
Hello. Oh, okay, thank you. Hello, Sergei. Thank you for your presentation. I really like it. I'm an undergraduate student in physics, and I'm studying machine learning in a course in my university, and Monte Carlo simulation in a scientific initiative, so in physics. So I want to ask you if you can give me some tips for like initiate the study of machine learning physics, and some recommendations, some books or some course that I can learn more about the machine learning in physics and in the particle physics.
Oh, thank you. That's a great question. I mean, one starting point, you could, of course, you can email me and I can send you some resources. That's certainly going to work. But I can tell you some other things. If you go to even this community white paper, it will give you an idea, even though it's a couple years old now and things move fast in the field of machine learning and the field of machine learning and particle physics are both moving very fast. However, many of the challenges, many of the ideas are spelled out there quite well. There's also some very good reviews for machine learning and particle physics that exist. And in fact, there's a new one coming out. So if you subscribe to the PDG, right? So the particle data group, you know, the Bible of particle physics with all the, you know, all the stuff, there will be also, it's not there yet, but the next year's version will hopefully also have a machine learning review, machine learning chapter. And so that will be also hopefully a good resource for new people starting out who want to learn more about it. So I teach a machine learning course and sometimes teach mini courses. I've been fortunate to have a chance to work, to actually visit Brazil a couple of years back with a mini course. But I think next year we're going to take, so I'm organizing a course. I will be teaching a machine learning course at University of Alabama, but I'm also organizing a course through the Fermilab LHC Physics Center in the spring, which will be open to, I think, probably high energy physics students. So if there are students here that may be interested to just, I mean, it'll be remote and you just sort of connect and listen. But if that is something that would interest folks, you know, please feel free to get in touch. Again, I'll leave my email here if that is something that would interest you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, we'll have time for maybe one more question if you have somebody in the audience want to post a question. Okay, well, you really talk about many things, and a lot of them still missed. I mean, you didn't have time. Maybe it's a good reason to invite you again. Maybe the organization will talk about, you think about for a next opportunity, or maybe one of these remote courses, as you mentioned. But okay, so I will make a very quick question, as I don't see any other hand raised. In your opinion, in the high energy physics experiments, and in, where do you think that the machine learning techniques can impact most the near future?
That's a good question. I think that the most impact, there's a lot of possibilities here, and there's a lot of work ongoing. So I don't want to necessarily, maybe minimize some area compared to another. But I do think that, the applications to physics analysis. Now there's been a lot of applications to particle identification, which is like, reconstruction, simulation, those areas. And that has an impact on physics analysis, right? Of course, the better you can identify individual particles, the better you can do in the end. Of course, that's true. The better your B tagging algorithm is, for example, that impacts all the analyses that care about B tagging and so on. Now, but I do think that there is more, more things that are coming up, and I can kind of see them happening. But maybe they haven't yet. It takes a couple of years, to get things through these big collaborations and internal reviews. So I think a lot of the upcoming things that are happening now, they actually are both on the area of reconstruction, trigger, and analysis. So disparate areas, but they will all have a big impact, because the analysis stuff, we're pushing in territories that were previously inaccessible thanks to machine learning. That's going to be quite an important thing. Going places where we couldn't go before, I should say. Really difficult areas that are unexplored. Maybe the easy stuff is quick to explore. It's the harder stuff to get to that maybe is also very, very worthwhile. Now, trigger and online and real-time machine learning, I think, is going to have another huge impact, because if you think about it, all the work we can do offline, at least in the CMS and Atlas experiments, they have these triggers, and they need to throw away most of their data. The quality of that work is also significantly impacted by what you're saving and what you keep. So can we actually improve, what we keep, or can we diversify it? Can we actually run these things online? Can we run some of these unsupervised techniques and so on to catch glimpses of new physics beyond where we thought it might be? I think that would have potentially a huge impact on how we actually do physics and how we analyze overall. So this is speculation, certainly on my part, but I think those are concrete things that I'm pretty sure are going to change how we're doing things, including, and machine learning, of course, for fast simulation and generative is going to have should have a major impact. Thank you. That's a very good question. We'll have to come back in a couple of years and see how this time machine kind of goes forward. But I also think that physics-inspired model, things I didn't have much time to talk about, so maybe it's an occasion to come back and talk about this. How is that going to change this? Because I think that we know as physicists, there are some symmetries. There is information, there is knowledge that we can input and make these algorithms better. And ultimately, this is a tool. So the better we build our tool, like the telescope for astronomy, the better, the more precise, the more science we can do. And the last thing I want to leave off with is we have a couple of group members with connection to Brazil in our group. So I want to also highlight that some of the work I showed today includes their work. So this is Davide Di Croce, my postdoc at University of Alabama. We have Ana Maria Silvar, whose work I showed earlier, who's our PhD student. And also Marcos Tidball, who is working on this a gravitational lensing project, who is currently in Brazil. So yeah, thanks again. So if you're a young person and you're really interested in some of these machine learning stuff, certainly get in touch. There's going to be a very interesting hackathon happening. This is not the right links, but get in touch with me, and I'll send, if anybody's interested, I'll send them a link. It's going to happen in November. So everybody's welcome. So thank you.
Okay, Sergei, thank you very much. It's nice to see David. He was from Werja. It's very nice to see him then. Well, unfortunately, we have to stop here because we have another session starting 5 minutes. It was very nice to see you again and to listen to this very, very interesting talk. I hope everybody enjoyed either. And so I thank you and the audience, and I think now it's with the organizers to close the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I wish you a wonderful meeting as well. Thank you for having me.